GamingBolt presents the 15 best sword fighting games that will test your skills. Video games have a lot of aspects that make them unique from other forms of media. For example, while movies allow the viewer to watch action take place on the sidelines, video games test the player in the skills that they will procure from playing the game. Some games like to use guns, while others prefer a more up-close and personal method. With that out of the way, here are the 15 best sword fighting games that will test your skills. Infinity Blade 3. Before there was Fortnite, Epic Games was at work on the Infinity Blade series. We're going to be talking about its third installment for this entry. The player taps and swipes the screen to control their character's actions. The game also allows players to dodge, block, or parry attacks, causing the opponent to stagger. This then gives the player the opportunity to strike. There is also magic in the game that is another method of dealing damage to your opponent. Red Steel 2. When people talk about the Wii, they're usually not praising it for its games. But games like Red Steel 2 make people think, hey, I guess the Wii isn't such a bad console after all. Red Steel 2 has the player take control of an unnamed hero, who was the last of the Kusagari clan. The game wasn't just a first-person shooter, but it allowed the player to fight up to 6 on-screen enemies at a time with swords. The enemies can deflect bullets with their own swords, meaning you can't go in guns blazing. You have to go in up close and personal sometimes. Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. Sometimes games need a reboot to get back onto their feet. Part of the Might and Magic series, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic was a much-needed reboot after the lack of sales from the prior games in the series. That being said, there were bound to be changes to the gameplay. One such change was an overhaul to the combat, making the player have to think more about how they want to fight enemies, as some of them are rather difficult to fight if the player isn't playing a character made to fight up close. Though there were other methods of fighting such as archery and magic, head-to-head seems to be pretty effective most of the time. Mordhau. Let's talk about a game that isn't quite out yet, but still deserves a spot on this list. Mordhau is an upcoming online multiplayer fighting game with a medieval setting. The game isn't all just swing here or swing there. Unlike a lot of games of this nature, it requires skill to actually beat your opponent as it uses real sword techniques, making the player not rely on spam clicking in hopes of hitting the target. Exanima. Video games with an isometric view are growing more as a cult following subcategory. While they're not dead by any means, they are less likely to show up as part of a mainstream game anymore. Exanima is a game that was released in 2015 to generally positive reviews on Steam. The world is unforgiving, the AI is smart, and its combat is physics-based. This means you can't go in swinging your sword all willy-nilly. As said on their Steam page, it is very tactical, and just casually pressing buttons won't get you very far. SOULSBORNE series. It probably wasn't a surprise this game series was going to be on here somewhere. After all, any of the SOULSBORNE games are unforgiving and at times cruel to the player, but we love it for that and wouldn't have it any other way. If you don't know of the series, well, you've probably been living under a rock. Set in a dark fantasy world filled with monsters that want nothing more in life than to screw you over, any of the Souls series will likely cause you to rage once, twice, or really maybe even 3 times. But that doesn't mean you can't play the game and be good at it. Some people are really, really good at the game. It just takes practice. Lots and lots of practice. Nioh. Have you ever wanted to be an Irish samurai? If so, Nioh is the game for you. Set in Japan around 1600, the player is put into the shoes of William, an Irish samurai who is contracted by Queen Elizabeth I to collect Amrita, which is the in-game experience points, as the Queen felt it would secure victory over Spain. The gameplay has the player in enclosed environments fighting not only human enemies but also supernatural yokai as well. There is no crystal clear route to win a mission. Each mission has multiple routes for the player to explore. Mount and Blade series. Let's go right back to a medieval setting with this entry. The Mount and Blade series takes place in a fictional medieval land known as Calradia. The game has had mixed reviews due to a variety of factors, like its combat mechanics and complex skill tree gaining praise, while its lackluster graphics and repeating quests hinder it from being a perfect game to a lot of people. The combat is somewhat complicated for some. The weapon effectiveness is determined by a number of factors, including the player's skill with that specific weapon type, as well as the weapon's quality. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. We all know of the Metal Gear series. It's one of those game franchises you just know about if you're a gamer. One of the more well-known spin-off games is Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Unlike most of the games in general, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance wasn't a third-person action shooter or stealth game. It was a hack-and-slash game. This meant that the whole point of all of the other Metal Gear games where stealth was a key component was thrown out the window. The transition may even be daunting to those players who are so used to stealth, guns, and boxes. Chivalry: Medieval Warfare. There seems to be a pattern here. Medieval games kind of rule over sword fighting. Chivalry: Medieval Warfare is a first-person combat game with a heavy focus on its multiplayer gameplay. Unlike a lot of these kinds of games, Medieval Warfare controls similar to a run-of-the-mill FPS, making it easier to play for those who aren't used to class-based fighting games such as this one. That being said, there is still a learning curve as this game is multiplayer focused, so other players are bound to be more skilled than the newbie who just popped the game in that very day. Shadow Warrior 2. Here I thought we were done with sequels, but here we are talking about Shadow Warrior 2. This game is a first-person shooter game with swords in it, of course. The game has new features such as 4-player co-op. It also holds upwards of 70 blades and explosive firearms in randomly generated landscapes. Oh yeah, and how could we forget its brutal damage system where you can absolutely own everything in your way. Severance: Blade of Darkness. While some of these games have lived a long life or are still kicking to this day, Severance: Blade of Darkness failed to do so, though it does live on through a dedicated cult following. While the game has had aspects of your average beat-em-up game, one aspect that shields it away from being called a beat-em-up was its use of severed body parts. As with a decent sum of games utilizing swords, you can sever body parts from your enemies, though in this one, you can go the extra mile and do more than just look at your handiwork. You can use them as weapons. This game also enjoys the player looking around as it has the player find 6 hidden runes to access the final fight. Bushido Blade. Sure, this game doesn't look like much to today's standards, but Bushido Blade was a game from the late 90s on the PlayStation. At the time, Bushido Blade was pretty innovative. The game was 3D and had a different take on its main content, which was third-person one-on-one sword fighting. Instead of displaying a timer and health bar, the game was reliant on a body damage system, where the player could possibly only wound the opponent, but you will still have to kill them in the end. That being said, it was usually a one-hit kill system for both parties. This makes it rather difficult for new players, or just that unlucky day that us gamers suffer through time and time again. Nidhogg 2. Leave it to indie developers to produce a game about a Norse mythological worm creature that is said to gnaw at the roots of the world tree. Nidhogg was an indie game released in 2014 and has since had another game on its roster with Nidhogg 2 in 2017. The game has better graphics and character customization as well. The game has the player face off against another player or an AI to reach the end by fighting each other off with anything provided to you, be it swords or just good old-fashioned hand-to-hand combat. Both parties have one singular goal in mind: to become food for the Nidhogg. For Honor. Ubisoft hit it out of the park with this one. Unlike most games on this list, this game is not limited to a singular type of character. Rather, it gives the player options in a third-person action game. You can play as a samurai, a knight, or a Viking. The game is both single-player and multiplayer, making it easier for new players to learn the ropes and jump into multiplayer battle when they feel like they can hold their own. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.